it looks like the Clippers finally found their fall guy in Chris Paul. They painted him as the villain, but anyone paying attention knows the real rot is deep inside that front office. We are looking at a liberated CP3 now. The news of his move to the Toronto Raptors has sent shockwaves through the league. This wasn't just a business move, it was a breakup. The point guard, once the face of the franchise, was tossed aside like yesterday's trash. But now, the truth is coming out, and he is not holding back on the toxic mess behind closed doors. Buckle up, because this story is wilder than you think. But before we dive into the dirt, smash that like button if you love NBA drama. Okay, let's analyze the deal. On February 4th, 2026, a three-way shuffle went down between the Clippers, Brooklyn Nets, and Raptors, landing Paul in the north, while Ochai Agbaji, a 2032 second rounder, and some cash headed to Brooklyn. Toronto's goal? Ducking the luxury tax by dumping Agbaji's contract. On the flip side, Los Angeles was desperate to slash about $7 million in tax penalties and free up a seat on the bench. The Nets walked away with Agbaji, a future pick, and $3.5 million to sweeten the pot. Let's be real, this was a spreadsheet trade. Strictly business, zero basketball logic involved. The Nets even tossed the rights to Vanja Marinkovic back to LA, a guy drafted way back in 2019 who is still in Europe, just to make the math work. So, Chris Paul lands with the Raptors, but don't buy a jersey yet. They are likely helping him find a contender. That is the boring official headline, a salary cap maneuver where everyone high fives over saved money. But if you want the juicy stuff, the drama brewing since December, you need to stick around. And hey, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss the next update. This trade wasn't random. It was the explosion of a ticking time bomb. The Clippers had a 12-time All-Star, a literal Hall of Famer, return home to finish his story. And management botched it so badly that every leak just makes them look more incompetent. It is honestly mind-blowing. Think about the Lob City days. The lobs, the hype. It is tragic that they chose to tarnish that legacy in his final lap. Remember, Paul inked a veteran minimum deal for $3.3 million on July 1st, 2025, right after the Warriors cut him loose. He was 40 years old and made it clear this was the swan song. He picked the Clippers for sentimental reasons. He became a superstar there. The Lob City era, playing with Blake, DJ, the dunks, the playoff battles. He wanted to hang up his sneakers where he felt most at home. The front office sold him on being the wise sage, the mentor to bring some grit to a quiet locker room. He did the work, summer runs, team dinners, backing up coach Tyronn Lue. It was a fairy tale setup. Then the ball tipped and the vibe shifted instantly. By December, the relationship was toxic. President Lawrence Frank actually warned Paul about being divisive. The silent treatment between him and Tyronn Lue lasted for weeks. He was getting into shouting matches with Jeff Van Gundy. The breaking point, a loss to the Miami Heat on December 2nd. The team got stranded on the tarmac for 6 hours due to plane trouble before finally reaching a hotel. That is when Frank cornered Paul in a room at midnight to drop the hammer. Paul fought for his spot, even dragging Mo Bamba in there to vouch for him as a good teammate. It fell on deaf ears. Frank was cold as ice. Go home. While the squad flew to Atlanta, a Hall of Famer was left booking his own commercial ticket back to LA. Disrespectful doesn't even cover it. At 2:40 a.m., he hit Instagram, just found out I am being sent home. 5 words, a peace sign emoji, and the internet melted down. Every reporter went into overdrive. The floodgates opened. The reports that surfaced over the next 2 months, culminating in this February 4th deal, peeled back the curtain on the dysfunction in Clipperland. But to really get it, we have to look at the beef with the coaches. If you are enjoying this breakdown, hit that like button. Now, the tension wasn't a slow burn. It was a wildfire. Specific moments showed a coaching staff that seemed intimidated by a guy who has been a floor general for 20 years. The friction with Jeff Van Gundy was explosive. It basically came down to whether a legend like CP3 was allowed to have an opinion during the game. The most telling moment happened on November 29th, 2025, in a loss to the Mavericks. It was a tight game, 114 to 110. In the fourth, Kawhi Leonard checked in cold after sitting for a while and had to guard Klay Thompson. Kawhi wasn't loose. Klay was on fire. Paul, watching from the sideline, did what he has done for 21 seasons. He spoke up. He tried to help. And the staff didn't want to hear it. Insider Chris Haynes gave us the scoop on that timeout, and it perfectly illustrates why this marriage failed. It wasn't about basketball, it was about ego. It all started during a crucial showdown against the Dallas Mavericks, the final homestand before the road trip. It was deep in the fourth quarter. Now, remember that Kawhi Leonard was on a strict minutes restriction. Insiders tell me that while guarding Klay Thompson, Leonard was visibly gassed after entering the game cold from a long sit-down. He was having a nightmare of a time staying in front of Klay Thompson. Consequently, the team burned a timeout late in that fourth quarter. And right there in the huddle, during that, Chris Paul approached Kawhi Leonard with a genuine question. Hey man, are your legs under you? You feeling good? Do you think you can lock down Klay? Paul then turned to the rest of the squad and said, hey, we might want to switch this up. Paul simply suggested a change in defensive assignments. He never barked an order. He just wanted to know if Leonard had the energy. He proposed to the group that they consider sticking a fresh defender on Thompson until Leonard could get his rhythm back. It was merely an idea. Thompson had already drained 5 or 6 triples by then. The coaching staff actually agreed and switched the matchup. But the drama unfolded the next day at 30,000 feet. Associate head coach Jeff Van Gundy called a summit with Paul on the team plane. Van Gundy grilled Paul, asking if he had hijacked the defensive scheme mid-game. Paul said, absolutely not. He had offered a tip, not a command. To clear his name, Paul literally stood up, marched down the aisle, and asked Kawhi Leonard and Chris Dunn to recap the conversation and back him up. This public scene only added fuel to the fire. Van Gundy reportedly snapped at Paul, telling him that while he might have had the freedom to make those audible calls on past rosters, that privilege didn't exist here. That specific word, leeway, stung. Just days before they cut him, on November 28th, Paul posted an Instagram story showing the dictionary definition of leeway. At that moment, fans were confused. But now, it all clicks. Van Gundy had weaponized that exact word to silence Paul's basketball IQ, and Paul dropped a receipt on Instagram without saying a word. Before we get into the rest of this mess, make sure to smash that like button if you think CP3 was disrespected. As Haynes reported, this was just one chapter in a book of verbal skirmishes between these two in a very short window. I was told Jeff Van Gundy explicitly said to Chris Paul, listen, you might have had leeway in other organizations to flip defensive coverages on the fly, but you do not have that leeway here. That exchange was just the tip of the iceberg regarding the toxic friction between Jeff Van Gundy and Chris Paul. It was one of several heated moments in that brief time. The confrontations weren't random. There was another icy moment on the sidelines during a rough stretch where Paul sat out 5 straight games. Paul and Van Gundy were stuck sitting right next to each other. Neither said a word for what felt like forever. The silence was deafening, until Paul broke the tension, sarcastically asking Van Gundy if he was giving him the silent treatment. Van Gundy just scoffed and doubted. Paul was being genuine. Multiple witnesses saw this go down. It highlighted exactly how personal the beef had become, between a legend desperate to win and an assistant coach who viewed that passion as a challenge to his authority. Meanwhile, Paul's dynamic with head coach Tyronn Lue was crashing and burning on a totally different track. At the start of the year, they were on the same page, collaborating all summer. But as the losses mounted and the Clippers stumbled to a 5-16 record, the vibe shifted. Paul's questions about strategy got louder, and Lue's fuse got shorter. On November 8th, 2025, following a game where Paul was glued to the bench for the entire second half, he dialed Lue for what turned into a 40-minute marathon call. He demanded to know why his minutes were vanishing. The chat got explosive. That was the final real dialogue they ever shared. For weeks after that blow-up, Paul and Lue were effectively giving each other the cold shoulder. Paul reportedly begged for a sit-down to address the rumors labeling him a locker room cancer. Lue shut him down. On November 9th, the day after the phone fight, Paul met with Lawrence Frank, who slapped him with a final warning about being divisive. 2 days later, on November 11th, during an off day after falling to the Atlanta Hawks, Paul was granted permission to speak to the squad. He apologized profusely. He insisted his criticism came from a desire to win. He told them he just wanted the team to be better. It didn't make a dent. The damage was done. 3 weeks later, they packed his bags and sent him home from Miami. Former player and Current analyst JJ Redick, a guy who battled alongside Paul during the Lob City era, broke down why the coaching staff's ego was the real villain here. He argued that the obsession with being right is way more dangerous than the focus on getting it right. When you prioritize your ego over the correct play, you might miss the winning move. You have a million variables to track, right? Especially in crunch time, there is chaos everywhere. So, as a coach, you should logically welcome input on how to fix the problem. Then, once you've slept on it, you address the protocol the next day in a calm, non-confrontational manner. Instead, this staff chose war. They chose hierarchy over a championship. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into this Clippers chaos. When the curtain finally fell, it revealed a coaching staff more interested in muzzling a Hall of Famer than actually heeding his advice. Yet, the friction on the bench was merely the tip of the iceberg. The real rot was festering inside the locker room itself. While the coaching clashes painted a grim picture, the silence of the superstars told an even darker story. Arguably, the locker room dynamic did more to tarnish the Clippers brand because it exposed a franchise culture completely devoid of substance. You had a roster of max contract vets who essentially acted like strangers. At the helm were two icons who chose isolation over inspiration. During the 2025-26 campaign, insiders described the vibe as eerily quiet. Zero chemistry off the floor, and a team group chat that was basically a ghost town used only for flight schedules. No voice, no direction. Kawhi Leonard, the face of the franchise, stuck to his usual script, silent, stoic, and obsessed with his own routine, rather than rallying the troops. James Harden, the primary ball handler, was casual to a fault. Neither stepped up to fill the massive leadership vacuum plaguing the squad. Before we dive into how Chris Paul tried to fix this mess, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. So, Paul walks in and tries to shock the system. He lit up the group chat, planned team dinners, and demanded real communication. He called out blown coverages during film study. He did exactly what made him legendary. He demanded accountability. But this specific group, they weren't buying what he was selling. Sources say Paul's abrasive style wasn't a surprise. That reputation for grating on nerves has trailed him for a decade. There's an old saying about Chris Paul that's been circulating for 10 years. The guy is a total pain in the neck. People say he's tough, that he wears you down eventually. I'll keep it real. Teammates have always whispered that he is. Exhausting to be around. It reminds me of the Allen Iverson situation. Remember how I skipped practice his whole career? Nobody cared when he was dropping 30. But when he returned to Philly without that explosive first step, suddenly, missing practice became a toxic issue because the production wasn't there to justify the headache. Chris Paul has always been a nagger, pushing his teammates' buttons, but when you aren't the guy guaranteeing 20 points and 10 assists every single night, nobody wants to hear the lecture. That parallel to Iverson really hits the nail on the head. Paul's intense nature used to be viewed as championship leadership. When he was the alpha dog, it was praised. But as a 40-year-old on a veteran's minimum catching D, N, P, S, it just felt like nagging. The message was the same, but the messenger had lost his leverage. This was especially true with Kawhi Leonard. Paul was constantly in his ear, offering unsolicited tactical advice. At first, it was mutual respect, but eventually, reports suggest Leonard got absolutely sick of the constant critiques, particularly while he was trying to navigate his own injury rehab and load management protocols. Leonard respects Paul's resume, but found the nonstop input draining. When the axe finally fell, Leonard and Harden found out via Twitter, just like the rest of us, zero heads up, while they feigned shock. For the cameras, insiders hinted at a quiet sense of relief that the locker room lawyer was finally gone. Harden's situation was even stickier given their past. When the front office floated the idea of signing Paul that offseason, Harden wasn't exactly jumping for joy. He remembered Paul's demanding personality vividly from their run in Houston between 2017 and 2019, where their styles clashed heavily. Harden played the good soldier in the press after Paul was cut in December, claiming it wasn't personal and blaming the suits upstairs. But the writing was on the wall. Harden had lived this movie before, and he knew it had a bad ending. The one guy who saw this train wreck coming was James Harden. Hey, if you're enjoying this breakdown, don't forget to subscribe. Now, insiders also point to a massive rift between Paul and the head coach that speed ran this divorce. From what I'm gathering from league sources this week, the friction between Paul and Tyronn Lue was absolutely toxic. It festered all season long until Lue simply decided he didn't want the veteran in his building anymore. But here's the real kicker for the Clippers. It wasn't just that personalities clashed. That happens in sports. The problem was the franchise had zero tools to fix it. No conflict resolution, no adult conversations. Nobody sat Paul, Lue, and Van Gundy in a room to hash it out like men. Instead, the staff just gave him the silent treatment. The front office issued threats. And eventually, they packed his bags in the dead of night. The culture wasn't just quiet, it was cowardly. When the heat turned up, the organization chose to amputate the limb rather than treat the wound. Udonis Haslem, a lifer with the... Coming from the Miami Heat culture, you learn quickly what a functional locker room actually looks like. The bare minimum expectation? A simple conversation. Paul never received that courtesy. Look, I'm the type of guy who won't let one individual bring down 15 others. If you are the single person poisoning the well, you have to go. However, even in that scenario, a legend like Chris Paul deserves the respect of a sit-down meeting with the head coach to hash it out. I am not backing down on that stance. As a former player who has been in the trenches, I stand by it. There needs to be an open-door policy for every athlete, whether the management likes what they have to say or not. It's about having that man-to-man communication. Even if we don't see eye to eye, at least we cleared the air. The irony here is absolutely suffocating. The Clippers signed Paul specifically to be a leader. He led, but apparently they didn't like what leadership looked like the moment it challenged the people in charge. Instead of adapting to win, they cut him loose and labeled it a mutual decision. But let's be real, the rot wasn't just on the hardwood or in the locker room. It went all the way up to the executive offices and the owner's suites. The front office and the owner simply vanished. Lawrence Frank released a statement the very day Paul was exiled. He stated the Clippers were moving on from Chris and that his time with the franchise was over. He called Chris a legendary Clipper with a historic resume. He claimed nobody was pinning the team's failures on Chris and that he personally took the heat for their losing record. Those were the official PR lines. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't buying the corporate script. He looked dead into the camera and let it fly. I don't give a damn what Lawrence says. I hate what he did. Now, I don't have a deep relationship with Lawrence Frank, but I've always respected him. I remember his days coaching the Nets. I remember his run with the Detroit Pistons. And then he dropped the hammer with the question the whole league was asking. How the hell do you treat Chris Paul like this? Here is a future Hall of Famer who came there for his swan song season. I don't give a damn about the state of the team. We know they are trash right now. We know they are rostering the most disappointing superstar in the sport. But this organizational failure went way beyond a sloppy press release. The details emerging from the night of December 2nd into December 3rd showed a staggering lack of professionalism following a loss to the Miami Heat. The team plane suffered mechanical issues, stranding everyone at the airport for nearly 6 hours. The squad eventually retreated to a hotel. Sometime around midnight, Lawrence Frank met Paul in a room to drop the hammer. He was done. Paul, completely blindsided, made a passionate argument for his spot. He highlighted his contributions, his desire to mentor the young guys, and his willingness to adapt. He even brought a teammate in to back him up. Frank was stone cold. The team jetted off to Atlanta the next morning, leaving Paul behind. He had to book his own commercial flight home. The news actually broke via Paul's own Instagram story in the middle of the night. The Clippers didn't even announce it first. They lost control of the narrative. They let a 40-year-old icon post a screenshot to social media at 2:40 in the morning, and that became the headline. Stephen A. broke down exactly why this was so disrespectful. To do this to him, to drag him on a road trip just to send him packing, you sent him home like a dog. This isn't about, stats. We can debate CP3's credentials and Hall of Fame status all day, and we will, but don't tell me he deserved to be treated like luggage. Before we get to the owner's reaction, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, what made this truly corrosive was the silence from the top. Steve Ballmer, the billionaire owner, went ghost. He didn't reach out to Paul at any point after the decision. Not a phone call, not a text message, nothing. This is a man worth over $100 billion who watched Paul legitimize his franchise during the Lob City era, a guy who made the Clippers relevant in a town that the Lakers owned and he couldn't pick up the phone. Blake Griffin called it out on a podcast, saying he was disappointed for Chris Paul and disappointed in the franchise, specifically noting Ballmer's absence. Lou Williams peeled back the curtain further, suggesting that Paul's criticism of the front office was the straw that broke the camel's back. It suggests the executives were more offended by Paul pointing out their failures than they were interested in fixing them. And then for 2 months, from December 3rd, 2025 to February 4th, 2026, the Clippers kept Paul in purgatory. He trained at the facility, stayed in shape, and waited while the Clippers paid him to sit on the couch. They couldn't find a trade partner, partly because Paul's contract had minimal asset value as a 1-year veteran minimum deal, and partly because the toxic drama surrounding his exit made other teams hesitant to bring him in mid-season. The entire limbo period was a masterclass in organizational failure. They simply couldn't effectively fit him into the rotation. They couldn't waive him cleanly, and finding a quick trade partner, impossible. So they just let the situation rot until the trade deadline forced their hand. Stephen A. Smith didn't hold back, linking this dysfunction to a long, ugly track record of front office failures that have come to define the Clippers under Lawrence Frank. He called Frank more of a cancer to the franchise than any player could ever be. I mean, what have the Clippers actually achieved? Is that not the man who traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and about 4 first-round picks just to acquire Paul George? Is that not the executive who let Kawhi Leonard practically blackmail the organization into making that move, just so he wouldn't sign with the Lakers? Was that not entirely on Lawrence Frank's watch? And now you are going to send Chris Paul packing? You are going to disrespect a future Hall of Famer, a guy who has been the ultimate professional in this league for 2 decades, and the former president of the Players Association like that? Please. That is a joke. And hey, if you are enjoying this breakdown, do not forget to smash that like button and subscribe. We are just getting started. The front office completely failed Paul. The owner ghosted him, and leaving him in limbo for 2 months just made it worse. But here is the kicker. None of this was new territory for the Clippers. This is a recurring nightmare that stretches back decades. If you want to know why this keeps happening to the Clippers, you have to look at the history. The Chris Paul saga did not happen in a vacuum. It fits perfectly into a pattern of organizational behavior that has haunted the Clippers for ages. A pattern of mishandling talent, botched communication, and decisions that prioritize a quick fix over a long-term reputation. The dark cloud hanging over everything is still the Donald Sterling scandal of 2014. Sterling, who controlled the team for 33 years, was caught on tape making horrific racist remarks regarding black people, including taking shots at Magic Johnson and instructing his girlfriend not to bring black guests to the games. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver brought the hammer down, banning Sterling for life, fining him $2.5 million, and forcing the sale of the team to Steve Ballmer for a then record $2 billion. That scandal exploded right during the Lob City playoffs, completely derailing a championship contender. Remember, former executive Elgin Baylor had sued Sterling back in 2009 for age and racial discrimination, claiming he was forced out after calling out what Baylor described as a plantation mentality. The suit was dismissed, but the stain remained. By the way, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss these deep dives. Even after Ballmer bought the team, that toxic culture didn't just vanish. The Sterling years embedded a deep dysfunction that new management groups have struggled to scrub away. Sure, under Ballmer, the spending went through the roof. The payroll ballooned and the Intuit Dome was built, but the player management issues, they stayed right there. Look at 2018. The Clippers traded Blake Griffin to the Detroit Pistons just months after handing him a 5-year, $171 million extension and making him the face of a campaign promising he was a Clipper for life. Griffin later revealed that the team straight up lied to him about rebuilding around the big three of him, Paul, and Jordan. That trade was slammed as deceptive and totally disrespectful, the kind of move that makes every player question if a handshake deal means anything in that building. Then we have the Paul George situation. After years of running with Leonard, George walked in the 2024 free agency to join the Philadelphia 76ers on a 4-year max deal because the Clippers wouldn't match the terms, crying about luxury tax concerns. George went on his podcast and openly admitted he felt undervalued, a front office pinching pennies on a team owned by one of the wealthiest humans on the planet, ended up pushing away a prime star. And do not even get me started on the ongoing management of Kawhi Leonard. His chronic knee issues wiped out the entire 2021-22 season and massive chunks of the following years. The medical staff prioritized long-term health so aggressively that it actually killed team chemistry and playoff readiness. Teammates got frustrated. Opponents made jokes. Stephen A. Smith has been screaming this question about Kawhi for years, and the Chris Paul situation finally put the hypocrisy on full display. You know what? He is spending his money wrong. He is investing it wrong. He has made the wrong investment. How many times do I have to say it on air? Why are you banking everything on Kawhi Leonard? You talk about a guy who should be an asset, but you know why you can't send him? You know why you can't trade him? You know why you can't send Kawhi home? Because he is always home. The man is literally always home. Jerry West leaving was just another nail in the coffin. The legendary basketball executive who played a critical role in recruiting Leonard and George to the Clippers walked away in 2020 feeling marginalized and eventually joined the rival Lakers front office. When one of the greatest basketball minds in history leaves because he feels sidelined, that tells you everything you need to know about how the organization values actual expertise. All these incidents stack up to create a very specific reputation among players and agents across the league. The Clippers are simply not a place where loyalty is rewarded or communication is respected. They have the cash, they have the shiny arena, and they have the market, but they do not have the culture. And the Chris Paul situation became the latest example of why that matters, becoming the absolute headline of that collapse. Yet, through the storm, Paul stayed cool as ice. When he finally broke his silence on the self, Kevin Hart and Kenan Thompson special, he didn't drag the Clippers through the mud. He didn't drop names. He simply spoke from the heart. He said, look, I am in the gym grinding every single day. You feel me? Right. In all honesty, with the messy way everything went down, I think for me, I have got too much love for this game to simply let it end on a note like that, you know? So I have enjoyed the break. I have definitely enjoyed the time off, for sure. Getting to catch my kids' games is a blessing, but I just do not know yet. And honestly, he didn't need to say another word. Paul's era with the Clippers is forever synonymous with Lob City. The victories, the viral moments, and the resurrection of a ghost franchise into a powerhouse that fans actually paid money to watch. But this final chapter writes a bitter truth into the archives, and the Clippers have nobody to point the finger at for this mess but themselves. Thanks for tuning in. If you dug this breakdown, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel, then click one of the boxes on your screen right now to keep the sports action rolling.